I'm Jaja Fay. I'm a digital strategist for the art world.
I'm Christian Luden from the Netherlands, and I have an art platform online on Instagram, and I work with artists on doing collaborations. Online influencer.
From David Zwirner, this is Dialogues, a podcast about artists and the way they think. This episode's pairing, Christian Luton and Jaja Fay. This episode of the podcast is a little bit more unconventional because we brought Christian and Jaja together to talk about an artist, Yayoi Kusama, who has an incredible online audience and whose audience is really affecting the way people experience her art. Christian and Jaja, thank you so much for being here today and part in this broad-ranging conversation, hopefully, about Instagram and art and the way people are making things.
Yeah, it's a pleasure being here.
Thanks for having us.
I thought that maybe we start, you mentioned in passing in the introduction before we were recording, that you guys had met before in a kind of Instagram
In Moscow, of all places.
Yeah, it was a show from Takashi Murakami at the Garage Museum 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I think it's a very perfect example of how the real world and the online world clash in this digital economy. Wherein, two people from various parts of the world get flown into Moscow to take pictures of an exhibition.
The exhibition itself was really focused on the art, but everything around there was focused on Instagram. So if you go to the bedroom, I don't know the restroom, there were all kind of mirrors with like Murakami artworks, but not like the original artworks were in the show, but like more the kind of where like a mirror where you take a photo and post it on Instagram.
Yeah, and he's the master of an immersive experience where all of his merchandise is at the shop, and every single interaction with him was like some type of moment to photograph or take videos of.
And I think when the Garage Museum did a show with Murakami, they wanted to go all in, and that's why they flew us in.
And how do you feel when you come to a show and it feels like it's being gamified? For instance, meaning like there's a mirror room, there are things that might not have to do with the art, but you know immediately what you're supposed to do as someone who's engaging with the medium. I mean, is that a turnoff?
I think as people who work in the art world, we have the benefit of knowing what's what, but I think the modern museum experience, and I use the word museum lightly because, as you know, there are other museums that have popped up that are not museums. The experience of going to a museum now is more about the performance of going to a museum, no longer really thinking about the purpose of how museums were originally established as educational institutions where you go to learn about objects and people and civilizations. Now it's purely to get this one deliverable, which is getting the photograph, and that kind of spurs this entire engagement around going somewhere to perform this life that people think that you have.
Yeah, I think it's really like if it's in the museum, if it's in the exhibition itself, it's definitely a turn off. I think especially for like the art lovers and the people who are really into art. But I think it's also like I think with the Murakami exhibition, it was like the show was really focused like on his artwork and didn't really focus on Instagram. But everything around there was focused on Instagram. And then I think it's a smart way to promote your exhibitions. And I think when people go for the mirrored bedroom selfie, they're gonna see the show and they're gonna learn about Murakami as an artist. They're gonna read about his background and stuff.
That's kind of what I wanted to add. The way you said it sounds sort of so pessimistic, Jaja. I read it that way. I'm sort of inherently, I guess, optimistic in the sense that, I think the medium can be as highbrow or as useful or as interesting as people make it out to be. And so I'm just curious about if you really feel that pessimistic or if in fact that's just one side of what you see, Instagram doing. And of course, now you have worked at museums, now at the Jewish Museum, previously to Guggenheim, to do this kind of work.
Yeah, and I've always felt conflicted. I'm someone who sits on both sides of the table, right? So I am someone who is thinking about how to translate our content and the mission of our institutions into a digital space, but then someone who's actively participating and personally sharing. And I think there's the opportunity of this optimism that comes with the goal of reaching an unlimited audience online. That's kind of what everyone's been talking about when they think about accessibility in the internet. But then you have very limited tools. So it becomes this very reductive experience of just the image, just the, whatever you're posting. But then the, phenomenon of these non-museums, like the Museum of Ice Cream, which is opening a permanent space in New York City, co-opting that language and all of the surface values that surround the experience of going to a museum and conflating that as the same thing. And I think the audience doesn't know any better.
Right.
And it's our job as museums, as people who work, in the space, to clarify. But it's definitely a machine that has become far beyond our control.
In your case, Christian, it feels like your art education began alongside your digital, and you're of course very young, and I feel like it's an interesting example because you've become really deeply involved in a certain artist's career, but very much the access point was
exactly
Instagram.
And I think also, if I'm going back to your point, I think everyone agrees it's bad if the artist compromises his work to get more Instagram likes or to be more shown or be more posted on Instagram. But I think also, like, if in the case we were in Moscow, and I think, like, how many kids can go to Moscow? Like, how many? Like, I come from a place close to Amsterdam, but like not Amsterdam, so I was never in the art world in New York. I didn't have the opportunity to go there. So to see all those artists exposed in those kind of big museums, like the Guggenheim or like the Garage Museum, like the internet and Instagram was the only way I could see it, basically. Of course, I think on the artist side, like if you compromise on making art or want to put a mirror in there so more people are gonna post about it, I don't think it's a good thing, of course. But I think as a museum and I think just as the art world, we have a job to reach more people, and not only the people who live in New York or in London.
The question for me about the medium is how you, and I wonder if you actively think about this, Jaja, and you, Christian, how you fight the surface values. You know what I mean? Like, how do you participate in a way that's compelling, meaning make images that people gravitate towards, without kind of inevitably dumbing down or sort of lowering the level of conversation?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I attempt to do every day. And I think also my practice is not only just thinking about Instagram, even though it's extremely powerful when it comes to visual art, but thinking about the entire digital ecosystem. So all of the other mediums you've noted, it's getting that person from just a post on Instagram into someone who clicks through to your website and goes deeper. It's really the gateway drug, hopefully, for more content.
No, I think it's really interesting what you say about the gateway drug. I think that's what I always try to do with the curation I'm doing on my own page. Is like, because I don't come from the art world, so I know how it is to be outside of the art world. So I know what kind of images were appealing to me, and I'm trying to now starting to learn more about art and getting into and being in the art world. I start to try to mix that with each other, and I think even there are some artists that are considered very art world, like even like a certain artist like Jordan Wolfson. When I posted a video of, I think it was at the Stedelijk Museum when he was doing the robot stripper performance art piece, it went viral, and I saw it everywhere. I saw it like on Reddit, I saw it on all the Instagram accounts. Like, it got more than a million plays and views, like on my own Instagram account. And I think that's because of the combination of like people that maybe don't come from the art world were looking like, what is this? And like sending it to friends and commenting under all the posts, like, is this art? Like, is it like the common whole discussion is coming? And the only reason why this is happening, why it's going viral, is because I also posted a lot of stuff that's maybe in the art world considered like easy,
right? Not highbrow in the same way, or something like. Right.
So I think that the combination between the high and low art is really important in curation and getting a big group excited for it.
Something that we're thinking about, something I would really love to hear about, is how you imagine kind of digital exhibition making. Initial mistake, I think, is to recreate the digital space in the physical space. And the way you experience something in a physical space is very different from the way you experience it in a digital space. And so we've been thinking a lot about digital exhibition making at the gallery and how narrative gets woven into something that you see online, a richness, context, archive get built in. So it's not just you in front of an artwork, but it's you with all the other things available to you when you see something digitally.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of experimentation in this realm in the last several years, none of which have been extremely successful.
No, I think no one cracked the
And
code.
I think the actual question to be asking is, do people want to experience art online? So I find the phenomenon of kind of the art world thriving right now in the way that people are continuing to go to museums more than ever before. People are continuing in record numbers to fly across the world to go to art fairs, biennials. It's still about this in-person experience because unlike any other creative industry where music or publishing has really disappeared because of Spotify and ebooks, art museums and galleries continue to thrive because people want to have experiences in person.
But I think also people want to share that experience.
Right. But and it doesn't replace the experience, unlike the activity of like watching a movie on Netflix. You don't have to go to the movie theater. There's nothing that's going to replace the art takes on so many forms. You cannot replace the experience of standing in the middle of a 4-channel video installation or looking up very closely at the surface of the painting. I think people, still want to have that social in real life experience.
Yeah, 100%. But I think also is that I think Instagram is one of the channels where a lot of people watch art, see art, and everything. But also I think Instagram is much more than that. It's also people checking what their friends are doing, what kind of fashion or food or where everything nowadays. So I think if Instagram only was made for art, it wouldn't work.
Right. One of the things that I would be concerned about, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier, Jaja, is that there is a reductive quality, obviously, to the platform, that it's presenting things in a very specific way. And I think we all agree that certain things look better on Instagram than other things. And that certainly doesn't mean they are less attractive or more attractive in person. So it's this kind of, and I guess the question is, has that ability to sort of predict what works on Instagram, which I think is, high contrast, colors, very muted things seem not to be that attractive, at least when I look at them on a screen. Like a Ryman, it's not gonna pop on Instagram, you know what I mean? But an Infinity Room is, or a Josh Smith painting most likely will, there's that kind of intense color palette. Do you see that being a factor in the way people are making things?
Yeah, well, it's a classic marketing question. What's your goal? So for the artist, if it's sales, does this actually generate money? Or are they more just interested in visibility? And I think there just hasn't been enough of a paradigm shift yet there's still transactions taking place. And I think we shouldn't ignore the fact that this entire system is based on the transaction between data that's being collected from its users and the people who are on the other side. But I don't think it's affected, artists to the extent of changing how they work. It might be, it's really just another dimension of presentation.
Yes, for artists that want to get a lot of reach, it really matters. I think artists I sell a lot of works through Instagram, and most of the time the works that get the most likes are not the most works that sell the easiest.
That's interesting.
So I think, and a lot of artists also know that, it's completely different liking a picture than buying a painting.
Will you talk a little more about that? If you can think of examples, not that you need to name names, but what is the difference between a likable picture and one that someone actually ends up transacting on?
I think one is liking a picture is something you think it's cool or you think, but not something you necessarily want to put in your home. But I think the big kind of difference is the audience. So what an audience likes who are buying a lot of artworks, who are real collectors, is something different than people who are just on their couch and liking a picture. There's a different kind of taste of those people. So I think getting a lot of likes or getting a lot of followers
might mean you're appealing to the wrong audience. You're not appealing to the qualified audience. You're appealing to, let's say, a less qualified audience who's actually not a buying audience. Qualified is maybe not the right word, but you understand what I'm getting at.
Of course. In terms of market.
Yeah, or art historically inclined or whatever.
But I think it's definitely it's changing. I mean, because I think a lot of those qualified people who can buy art are all definitely looking at the numbers and who is really popular right now.
Right.
And I think if we talk about a cause who is now a market phenomenal, he got a lot of Instagram followers. He got a lot of people posting about him. If you do the hashtag cause, you see so many people posting about it. And that means that a lot of young people are into cause, they're fighting for Uniqlo tees and everything. And at a certain time, that's gonna also really a few billionaires are gonna be also interested in it because whoa, this guy is so big right now maybe I should buy an original painting of him.
The artist who in a way from the beginning has been able to operate in both spheres is Kusama, and this sort of mainstream, even pre-Instagram kind of mainstream fanaticism around her work and experience her work, which is now, made much more intense by Instagram, has existed alongside an extremely robust market. And I would love to hear, maybe starting with you, Jaja, how that happens, if that's something that happens organically, if it's about the myth or the narrative.
Right place, right time. Is Yayoi Kusama even on Instagram? This was absolutely not by design.
No, not at all.
And I think it's the confluence of so many things. Yes, she's been very successful her whole career. But I think, the internet has opened up this new audience that has really exploded and proliferated this very unique visual aesthetic. She's very lucky in capturing the audience that's been generated around her, but I think so much of it is kind of by accident.
But it's also like super authentic. Like
Yeah.
she was all doing this in the 60s.
Way before exactly the internet even existed.
Yeah, it's insane. And that's, I think, why she's appealing to both kind of sides, of course. Is because like the real audience, or like the real collectors, they know the story. They know she didn't make it for Instagram. They know. So yeah, I think, and I saw like a quote, I think it was for the New York Times, was like, she's the most important artist of the 1960s. I think that's even like wrong. She's like the most important artist of now. Her art is about infinity, like the infinity rooms. And what Instagram did was all her exhibitions are like in the universe, like kind of like a new universe created for her artworks, and it's going on. It's an infinity.
But then when you say that, of course, it's accidental in the sense that there is nothing plotted about, like you say, Kusama's not.
It was not a
That would be
marketing
genius.
campaign.
There was no.
The Fire Festival of the art world.
Right, but exactly. But that's sort of what's amazing, is that by not being at all deliberate or calculated, it has somehow been the most effective in that world of anything. And so I guess what I wanted to hear more about is it that the aesthetic sort of aligned, or was she was prescient in the sense that aesthetic is exactly the kind of aesthetic that was being cooked up online by people participating in this? It happened to be that things like polka dots, colors, a kind of palette that's a little bit, that's sort of broader or appeals to a wider audience.
Yeah, I think the key is accessibility. So, artists that are very successful online, James Turrell, Yayoi Kusama, these are experiences that can be appealing to anyone, people with absolutely no art background, appreciation, and understanding of art. And I think that's critical because even though we do have new tools at our disposal, art is still very difficult to access. It's for a very limited part of the world. Arts education has been depleted. I guess my concern is that because you now have this kind of hyper promoted aesthetic online, how does this affect long-term digital art history?
Right.
When you look at the record of what people used to look at,
Right.
if you have like a million KAWS and Kusama tags, like, was that the era we were living in? Like, who
Were those
else?
the most important artists?
Yeah,
basically,
exactly.
more than
So,
anyone else?
This new quantitative measurement of success, she, is just kind of operating in a very universal perspective
Yeah,
too.
I
Like,
think
who
she's-
doesn't love polka dots and like sparkly things?
In this case, there's a visual aesthetic which has aligned with a story that to me is extremely meaningful and compelling, right? You have an artist who came to New York, was a total outsider, an Asian woman in a totally macho world, a world that didn't want anything really to do with her, that would have
In
never
an
let her.
area of in an era of abstract expressionism,
Abstract expressionism with men
very male,
dominating
white
the field.
male.
Yeah. And if you watch the documentary that came out recently about her, literally, like she needed patrons, she was turned down from lots of museums, and something about kind of underdog, return to success, and appeal to a broad group, and this sort of quite pure utopian messaging, I feel has made her this sensation. So it's operating on two levels. There's the immediate visual level, but it's also tapped into what I would say is like the best side of something like Instagram, which is the ability to feel a powerful message that in this case is authentic and is not corporate in the sense that some brand is telling you to have good values in order to buy the product, but is actually genuine.
She's
What do you
almost
think?
this alien creature. And
Yeah.
I think, again, by design, like Instagram is really favors this idea of, icon worship, where you've seen like
Yeah.
fake influencers, like people who are made in CGI kind of engineered to have a certain number of traits. And because her life is so strange and almost, otherworldly, I think people gravitate to this character. And though she is very much a real person.
But would you, as like a gallerist, would you recommend an artist to be on Instagram?
I would say if it's a natural extension of how you enjoy looking at things and doing things, then absolutely yes. But same question to you before we end, the sort of the way you see things unfolding, Kristen.
I think like Instagram, and I think more in general is like having more fans and being more liked by the big public is going to be more and more important. I think like we are seeing the tip of the iceberg with a Kusama, with a Cause, and I think it's definitely driving up prices, but also driving up museums want to show art. Like museums need to have some blockbuster shows, like to get people into the museums and see the collections and stuff. So I think being popular is definitely is going to be a bigger and bigger thing for artists. And I think the way to become more popular is online, because that's where you can reach a lot of people. I really believe the combination between offline and online is going to be
the crucial thing.
Yeah, the crucial thing. And that's why I think also for artists, I would like advise an artist to be on Instagram or to be online. Because if you're going to do an offline show, you want people to see your works, like tell your followers or like your fans is a really big thing. And I think also artists are going to get much more power.
Absolutely. And I think that, one thing's for sure, that galleries need to get sophisticated about using those to promote artists, because like Kusama, if she's not on Instagram, then it is definitely the gallery's responsibility to make sure that some of that great promotional marketing stuff is happening for her, Jaja and Kristen, thank you so much for doing this today. This was great to have the conversation. Dialogues is produced by David Zwirner. You can find out more about the artists on this series by going to davidzwirner.com/dialogues. And if you liked what you heard, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. It really does help other people discover the show. I'm Lucas Zwirner. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you join us again next time.